Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and it's a bright sunny day here in suburban Philly, and I'm joined by I've got two colleagues now. Ryan went AWOL last week, but he's back. Hey, Ryan.
AWOL, I was on vacation, Mark.
Well,
I had to take the kids to Hershey Park.
Synonymous from my perspective,
I did bring the mic. I was ready to do the
way?
podcast, but Hershey Park is full of kids, and there's no quiet place to be found.
Has Hershey? I mean, I took my kids there when I was your age, probably 20 years ago now, and I wonder if it's changed at all. Does it look like it's changed? Is it the same Hershey Park?
Yeah, I remember it looked the same as when I went there as a kid.
Oh, is that right? Nothing's changed.
Yeah, the chocolate factory, the chocolate world, all that stuff is pretty much the same.
It's pretty much the same. Well, the chocolate is, obviously can't touch that. I mean,
that's the highlight.
It's a classic. Yeah, good. We got Chris Dorides. Chris, hey, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing, Mark?
You're not in the office today, or are you in the office?
I am in the office.
Okay.
I just pulled the blinds here. So.
Oh, you pulled the blinds. Okay, very good. And Ryan, Chris never goes AWOL on me. He, vacation or not. Oh no, once he did, right?
He did go AWOL.
Even he went on vacation. He was in Italy. He was in some kind of wine cellar or something doing the podcast.
I was on the podcast though. Come on.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. And we've got a guest. We've got a guest, Jared Bernstein. Jared, hi. How are you?
Hi. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know, Jared is on the Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden administration. It's really a pleasure and honor to have you here. He indicated that he'd be with us for a couple hours. No.
I wish.
Yeah, as you said, taxpayers would begin to question that. So we're very glad for the time you can spend with us. So we really do appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And a lot of ground to cover. We want to play the game, the statistics game, and I know, Jared, you're a fan of that game. You, as I recall, I don't know if I told Ryan and Chris this. I think early on in the podcast a year ago, there was a question about Chinese GDP.
Oh yeah,
quarter.
Yeah. So that was where I realized the fix had to be in because somebody cited nominal. Okay, here's what happened. If I may have this wrong, but you guys will remember. Somebody cited quarterly nominal Chinese GDP growth, non-annualized or something, and somebody else knew what it was. And at that point, I was like, "Oh, okay, so there's a fix. I get it. That's cool."
But the reality was no fix. Actually, last week I blew these guys' minds. No, it was 2 weeks ago. Right, Chris? What was that?
Yes, the food price index.
Oh yeah, the UN
FAO
food price index.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was fun.
There's a fix.
No fix.
Chris and Mark are in cahoots.
Yeah. See, Ryan gets really upset if someone else wins the game because he's the maven. But Jared, thanks for coming on. And before we kind of dive in, I thought maybe we could just spend a few minutes. You can describe for the folks out there, what do you do for a living at the CEO?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, broadly speaking, the Council of Economic Advisors provides economic advice to the president of the administration. More granularly, we really do four things. We write the economic report of the president every year, and that just came out, and we're so proud of it. And I hope people will go through it. It's just our senior economists and staff did such a great job. Secondly, we make sure the president is up to speed on the data flow, which is what you guys talk about all the time. Almost every day, there's a data report, and that goes into his book with our commentary. The third thing is we work on policy processes. So when we're talking about energy policy, countercyclical policy, really, any of the policies that are in the economic sphere, members of the CEA are working on those behind the scenes, and that can be a matter of days, weeks, or months. And then finally, metaphorical fire drills. You're sitting at home on a Sunday morning and the Turkish lira crashes, and the president wants to know what the heck was that about, and you have to tell him.
Yeah, and the one thing I found fascinating, I didn't know this until recently, was that you actually see some of these economic statistics before the rest of us do, right? To help you be able to give the commentary to the president when the real time, or even before the rest of the.
Yeah, typically the data reports go in the president's book the night before, but not only do we not talk about them when they come out the next day, but in order to respect market reactions, we don't talk about the reports until an hour after they're released.
Ah,
So that usually means 9:30, but here's a statistical question. Sometimes it means 10:15. What report would that be?
industrial production.
Industrial production. Damn,
Ding,
you
ding,
are
ding,
good.
ding.
Sometimes it means 11. I
Ooh.
think I'm right about that.
That could be a slew of things. It could be business
ISM.
inventories, NAHB. Like there's a lot of stuff comes out.
I was thinking JOLTS. Doesn't JOLTS come out at 10?
Oh, Joel's is a good one.
Joel's.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Doesn't that come out at 10?
It
from
does.
BLS? Yeah. So we wouldn't talk about that until 11.
Interesting. So you wait 1 hour after the release before you're able to talk about
Not
it.
only do we wait, but that's actually a rule in the OMB, in the Office of Management and Budget Registry.
Oh, is
That's
that
not
right?
just arbitrary. That's actually a rule that was often broken by the prior administration, by
I
the
was
Mhm.
going
way.
to say, even by the president, as I recall, the former president. Yeah, yeah, as I recall. Um, and so, how did you find your way to the CEA? I mean, I think we
395 to the memorial. Oh, sorry, no, that's not what you mean. I've worked in political economy for much of my career. I was at the Economic Policy Institute when I first came to Washington, working closely with Larry Michelle and
Mhm.
other folks there, Dean Baker, and still think the EPI, now headed by Heidi Sherholtz, is one of our greatest think tanks. Anyway, went over to the Center on Budget for a while, which is just the premier kind of public finance group, focusing more on low-income people. And like many political economists in Washington, come in and out of government. I worked for the Clinton administration, and then I was President Biden's chief economist when he was the vice president. And that was, a really interesting time. That was in 2009 and 10, during the financial crisis, where Vice President Biden was the implementer in chief of the Recovery Act. And so I spent a lot of time on that. And then someone with a very much of a Keynesian background, that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, so you've known the president for quite some time now.
I have. It's been my privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, so were you his economist, the chief economist for the vice president through both terms? I can't quite remember.
No. Ben Harris took over, and now
Ben
Ben
Harris,
is
right.
is a assistant secretary at Treasury, and
Yeah.
Ben and I enjoy the fact that we have that in our past. And there was a great guy here named Mike Pyle, who is the chief economist for Vice President Harris. So that is an active position.
Right, and we've had touch points all along. Going all the way back to EPI. I think during the financial crisis.
You and I?
I believe so.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you were at the center, you commissioned some work
That's right.
that I did with Alan Blinder.
That's right. It was a
Remember
really
that?
great piece. Looking back at the Recovery Act, that piece still gets cited all over the place.
Does it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you and your team have been very helpful to us along the way, and
You're kind.
very much appreciate the insights.
I had to convince Alan Blinder, the vice chair of the Fed, and of course, Princeton professor, this great, wonderful person, who, by the way, I should say, there are some people that when you talk with them, you just, like, everything they say you disagree with. And there's some people, no matter what they say, you go, oh man, I agree with that. And Alan Blinder is one of those guys, everything he says, I agree with. It's like, it's amazing. You're second place, Jared, by the way. You're in second place.
No, that's interesting you should say that, because I feel not only do I agree with what Alan says with an asterisk that I'll share with you in a second, but it's the way he says it.
Yeah, exactly.
He's so crystal clear. He's engaging. He's really funny also. I remember he stood up at a Fed conference that I was at once, and we were talking about messaging, how the Fed messages. And he said, first of all, nobody even knows what the Fed is. He said, I was talking about the Fed the other night, and I was talking about this thing, the Federal Reserve, and someone thought I was talking about a national park, like a forest somewhere.
Right, exactly.
That's an Alan Blinder. I mean, he has tons of lines. Alan Blinder I've stolen so many Alan Blinder phrases. One of the things he says is when he talks about policies that exacerbate inflation, that like tax cuts for rich people, he says that's some unnecessary roughness to the income distribution.
Yeah, right.
You know, because the primary distribution is already going in that direction. So why would you want to make the secondary distribution even more inequitable? The only reason they're disastrous is we've disagreed on trade policy, but it's always been very collegial, and hopefully, you know, I know we've listened to each other, but I guess the truth is I've learned way more from Alan than he'll ever learn from me.
Yeah, he's great.
Just because he's so knowledgeable.
Yeah, I did have to convince him though to tell you to do that study. I remember I go, Alan, we just got to put a stake in the ground here for history.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did.
That was a good summer working on that paper with Alan Blander. Thank you for commissioning that. That was very helpful. Well, before we get to the game, you know, I thought it might be good to get a sense from you of how you think things are going. I mean, just to preface this, it feels like there's a lot of pessimism out there. I don't know how you're reading things, but you know, you've got consumers, they're down in the dumps. You look at the University of Michigan sentiment survey, and that's about as low as it's been since the financial crisis.
Actually, it got a bit of a bump in the last read.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it's actually up about, but I mean, just partially. You know, it's still low, but it got a pretty significant bump up, about 10%, I think, in the overall index. Something in that name.
Well, yeah, you're looking for those green shoots. I can see.
Yeah, no, I don't want to overstate that at all. In fact, back when I worked for the green shoot reference, for those who don't get it, is back when I worked for the Obama administration. People were talking about green shoots in terms of the recovery. And I was on a TV show once where people could call in. This is when I worked for the vice president. And I remember someone saying, "You guys must be smoking green shoots."
That sounds like an Alan Blinder line. Yeah, that's
so. Anyway, my point is that, you know, I'm just correcting. You know, there was that, but it's still the premise of your question is of course correct.
Well, you know, an economist generally they're pretty low to say, okay, we're going to have a recession. I don't know if you've noticed, but yeah, Deutsche Bank last week, or was it the week before? And then I think yesterday or the day before that, Fannie Mae, Doug Duncan, the chief economist over at Fannie, presumably it's from him, calling for recession in 2020.
Yeah. But wait a second, like back up, my friend. Yeah. Like we are in an economy that is faced with some very considerable headwinds, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and boosted by some very considerable tailwinds, which we should also talk about. And, you know, I know that sometimes people say like, oh, the press is just focused on the negative. If it bleeds, it leads. And everything's inflation all the time. I'm not really bringing that argument to the table. I think people don't need the media to tell them that inflation is elevated. They see it themselves. But I do think that the coverage has often ignored not just a set of tailwinds, but many fingerprints on those tailwinds of President Biden's policies. So the fact that we're sitting here with an unemployment rate that's a tick above where it was before the pandemic, 3.6 versus 3.5, the fact that household balance sheets, if you look at net worth or if you look at debt service obligations, are in pretty stellar shape. By the way, I realize that's very much talking about inequality. That's very much a macro or aggregate observation. And in fact, you yourselves have done really useful work on the disaggregation of those savings rates. Maybe you'll talk about them. But based on the strength of the job market, the number of jobs, the strength of household balance sheets, the growth of total compensation, jobs and wages together. There are a lot of tailwinds operating as well, and I think we should be mindful of them and take a balanced view. That doesn't mean that you put your head in the sand, and in fact, far from it. And maybe if we get a chance in our discussion, I can tell you all the things that we're trying to do to help ameliorate, ease some of those price pressures that consumers are facing, because we take them very seriously. Every time the president talks about the economy, he talks about these inflationary pressures. But we should be balanced in our headwind tailwind analysis.
Yeah, agreed, and I'm with you on that. Although my colleagues here, they're a little bit more pessimistic. We had Michael Strain. You know, Michael, he's the runs research over at AEI.
Many of his arguments end up being quite strained.
Yeah,
listen carefully.
But he's a good guy.
He is a great guy.
Thoughtful guy. And of course, he's pretty pessimistic, and so are these two. Yeah, I'll have to say. I mean, I think Ryan, what were you saying? What was the probability of recession over the next couple of years? I can't remember. You 75% or something.
Yeah.
I think I said 70,
And then
70,
Mr.
75.
Dorides, who's kind of down the fairway, I call him down the fairway Dorides. He's even over 50%. Isn't that right? Over the next-
55. Yep.
55%. Yeah. So
When?
That was within 18 months, right?
18 months.
within
Yeah.
18, with
So.
18 months. I'm at 1/3, by the way, just to be on the record.
You always have
Oh.
to say, what's your time frame when you say your recession probability?
12 to 18 months, I think.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Kind of focused on beginning in. We're even more precise. We won't tell you the exact day.
I
but-
think a lot of this, look, again, I get it. We have the models. We should run the models. We run them all. We pay attention to all of the probabilities that folks like you are putting out. I think we should be very aware, and I'd be interested in other members of the panel talking about this, see if you agree that we are in a very unique and sui generis economy. And while we can plunk all we want into our models, it's a little tricky to deal with some things that are so unusual. So for example, of course, the pandemic. The pandemic is still upon the land. Obviously, its impacts on the economy have been diminished. The Russian-Ukraine, Putin's unjust and unprovoked war is very much in the mix. And we're entering this period with the tailwinds I talked about. So look, I've taken some of these regression probability models and I've then put in things like household balance sheets or I'm trying to remember.
Like debt service, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like the debt service obligation, and the probabilities shift a lot.
Yeah.
So that, look, there's something to be said for taking a tried and true, probit model with a yield curve and seeing what you get. But I think you have to be mindful of how unusual the situation is. Too many analyses I've seen don't take account of some very different factors in play right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're making an important point that more just to broaden that out, that the kind of the fundamentals of the economy feel like they're in very good shape. And when I say fundamentals, like kind of the balance sheet of the economy, and you've been talking about the household balance sheet, debt service is a percent of income that households have to devote to servicing interest and principal. And that's I think it's at a record low or pretty close. Corporate balance sheets feel like in pretty good shape. State and local government balance sheets feel like they're in no small part because of the American Rescue Plan and all of the money that went to state and local government.
Yeah.
So,
are you familiar with the statistic? I probably should have put this on my list for the game. Is the private financial balance, which is a pretty important indicator of precisely this, basically savings versus gross private savings minus gross private investment. That's in good shape right now. So look, nobody's discounting the risks. And in fact, as I said, the president talks about them every time he speaks. I think our job here at the White House is less to noodle around, which probability is most believable. I mean, we do that here at the CEA because, we want to make sure we're seeing what markets are thinking about. But more, what is how are households doing? How are they prepped for whatever comes their way? And what kind of, quote, insurance policies need to be in place to help them if things were to deteriorate? And furthermore, what can we do in the near term, medium term, and long term to help address some supply side constraints, whether we're talking about the ports, whether we're talking about competition policy, whether we're talking about the labor force, which I hope we get to talk about because I know you all think about that. And I think it's, here's something that you'll find interesting maybe. And I wonder if you do this. When the jobs report comes in, everybody goes and looks at the jobs number, payroll jobs number. That's not the first number I look at. I look at the LFPR, and then I look at the jobs number. That's how important I think labor force participation is right now in terms of the again, kind of helping to meet the strongest labor demand by some measures we've ever seen.
Well, I want to come back to all of that, and before that, we're going to do the game. But I have one more question, since we're on the this discussion around recession risks, and get your take on the yield curve. So this has generated a lot of angst in different circles. The yield curve is the difference between long-term and short-term interest rates. Typically, long rates are higher than short rates, but every so often short rates rise above long. The curve, so-called, inverts, and that's been a very prescient indicator of future recession. And if you go back to the beginning of April, the yield curve as measured by the 2-year Treasury yield and 10-year inverted for a few days, which kind of made people go, on high alert here with regard to recession risk. So question to you, in this group, I should say, has debated this on a number of podcasts, and we all have, I think, I'm not a proselytizer, but I am a believer in the yield curve. I think Ryan is a denier.
Skeptic.
A skeptic. I keep forgetting that. And
Yield
Chris,
curve denier. I didn't know that there was such a category.
Chris,
You can probably throw me in there.
Chris goes in either direction. He's down the fairway, Chris. So I'm not sure exactly where he stands on the yield curve. But so what's your thoughts on that? How much hand wringing should we be doing over the message or non-message in the shape of the yield
I
curve?
don't think we should ever try to reduce our understanding of where the economy is and where it's going by one variable, or in this case, the delta between two variables at different maturities. I think I try not to be the one hand, other hand economist that much, but in this case, I really am. On the one hand, you've got all these people saying, "Hey, this time is different," and then on the other hand, like all the people who say this time is different are often wrong. So I think it's a challenge. It's also something that at the White House we try to be pretty careful about talking about market variables in any sort of granular way. So I probably don't want to say a lot about that. What I will say is that this is, again, and I'm not going to go through this because I already did. This is a very unique moment in economic history with lots of different cross-cutting currents, some strong headwinds, some very strong tailwinds. So I'd certainly look at the yield curve as one variable. I wouldn't overweight it, and I might probably give it a little bit of underweight. I don't know if I'd quite join Ryan's club, but I'd come to their meetings.
See, there you go. All you got to do is come to the meetings.
Right. Very good. Okay. All right. Let's play the game.
Wait, before we play the game,
okay.
As we were talking about all this,
you do know, Jerry, this is my podcast. I'm just saying. But go ahead.
I don't think so.
Well, that's why I'm going to ask you. If you, that's what I'm going to ask you. Is this all led me to think about a joke that I was thinking about this morning, and I if you have a second, I could tell you.
Yeah, fire away. Yeah.
So. I think this is the captain of the ship is sailing along, and he sees a warship coming his way, a very big and threatening warship, and he says to his first mate, "Get me my red shirt." And his first mate says, "I will, Captain, but we need to prepare for battle. Why your red shirt?" And he says, "Because if in the course of battle I am stabbed and I start to bleed, I don't want the crew to see me bleeding. And that will inspire them to know their captain is, fighting for them." And he got him his red shirt, and the story got around the crew, and everyone was so uplifted by the captain's bravery that they fought and just put all their fight into it, and they defeated the much bigger warship. And they were all very happy. And the next day they were sailing along, and 8 huge warships, each one bigger than the one from yesterday, came sailing around the corner. And the captain says to his first mate, "Get me my brown pants."
Oh, no. Here we go.
So I think the question is, are we talking about a red shirt economy or a brown pants economy? And I think we're talking,
that is the greatest.
I think
joke.
I think we're in red shirt territory.
Red shirt territory.
We can fight this battle.
Hold it. Is that your joke, or did you hear that joke? That's
I
a
didn't
great joke.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't make it up.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, that just summarizes things beautifully. Oh, okay. Let's play the game. And of course, the game. Let me just describe for any listener who has not been listening to us, which would be, why aren't you been listening to us? But the game is, we each tell a statistic. The rest of us try to figure out what that statistic is through questions and some clues and deductive reasoning. The best statistic is one where it's not so easy that we all get it slam dunk, not so hard that forget about it. And you get a bonus star if it's apropos to what we're talking about, or something that's relevant to the statistics. I will say this week was hard, for me at least, because there were no statistics. I mean, or very few statistics.
No, there was a lot of housing. You got housing starts.
A bit on housing,
NHB,
yeah. And I'm sure maybe we're all
Chris.
going to mine the same statistics. I don't know, but we'll see. But you can think more expansively here because obviously a little bit of a quiet week. But anyway, who would like to go first? Maybe we won't have Jared go first, just so he can get into the flow. What do you think? Should we go? What do you think, Ryan? Should you go?
Let Chris go first.
Let Chris go first.
It was like a housing.
It's going to be
plethora.
housing. Yeah.
Yep.
Jared, Chris is a houser. He's a former Fannie Mae modeler. So,
I think that's such a great, such a crucial area of policy right now. So
we'll come back to that.
Yeah, let's do.
We'll definitely come back to that. All right, Chris, fire away.
All right.
Better be good. No.
Well,
you
you got a track record to maintain here. I'm glad Ryan's back. So 116.8441.
Oh my.
Okay. Whoa. How many decimals did you just go out there?
Wait.
116.
It's reported by the source. But
116.844.
Is it a housing statistic?
it is not a housing statistic.
Oh, you threw us for a loop.
Yeah.
Is it an index number?
It is an index. Yes. Yes.
Anything related to prices?
Well, in a very broad sense, yes.
In a broad sense, but not house prices.
Nope.
It came out this week.
Came out this week. Yes.
It did.
What year? This may be
this week. Oh, well, it came out on the Friday of last week. So,
Friday?
yeah, it was after our podcast. So.
Oh. What could that be, Ryan? You should know these. You should know that. Oh, you were at Hershey Park.
I was in Hershey Park.
Somewhere else. Yeah.
Would
Wait,
you like
is this
a hint?
industrial production?
Nope.
Industrial production came out on Friday.
No. Would you like
Can you
a
give
hint?
us a hint? Can you give us a hint? Like, what's the genre?
I'm glad you asked for it.
Wait, hold on. Before you give us a hint, this is a form of a hint. If it's an index, it's based in some year in 100. What year is it? So in other words, it's 16% above something that was 100 when?
Oh gosh,
Oh, good question.
You don't know. That's okay. Sorry.
I'll have to look it up.
Give us your.
So can you give us a broad hint?
I'll give you the hint.
Okay.
A musical hint?
I can't hear that. What is that?
Did you hear it?
No.
Oh, let me go back.
We're going to name this tune now?
Name this tune.
It's such a great hint.
You are getting very creative.
I'm getting sophisticated here.
Over the top creative here.
Is that Hurdle?
Dollar.
Oh, something about the dollar, the strength of the
Yes.
dollar.
The
That's-
trade-weighted dollar.
That's how much the
Trade-weighted
dollar.
index?
Oh, the
Trade-weighted
nominal
dollar.
Is it the nominal broad trade weighted dollar?
It is the nominal
Very good.
broad
Yeah, that's a good one.
dollar index.
That is not a good one, Jared. I don't know what the heck.
That's
you're
a great
talking about.
one.
That is
It's a great one.
bad
The dollar's really important right now, and
Mhm.
it's
But
Thank you.
116.1.
Thank you. Jared, you can come on anytime.
You could have said like 108 and 132. Like the euro and the pound. But you got to give us the innocuous Fed index. Okay. Well, anyway, what's it saying? What's the deal on the dollar?
Well, it's up. It's showing that the dollar has been strengthening recently. The dollar is up 10% against the euro, and 10% against the yen and 5% against the euro so far this year. So strengthening dollar in the context of inflation, it's good for consumers, right? Foreign goods are cheaper, right? That helps to reduce some of the inflationary effects. Not great for exporters or for multinational corporations that are converting their foreign exchange back to dollars. But so there could be some knock-on consequences here. We could get a flood of imports as a consequence. But at least for the short term, this is a benefit for consumers in terms of containing some of the inflationary pressure.
I actually got a question from a client. It was yesterday about the dollar. In our forecast, we have the dollar coming down, and the logic being that there's a flight to quality, or given all the risks, the Russian invasion and pandemic, there's been a flight to quality into U.S. assets in the dollar, and that will come out over time. When I say down, not down right away, but down over the next year or two. And then the other is, of course, the Fed's on high alert, and that's really juiced up the flows of capital, near-term capital into the U.S., and that'll abate as the rest of the world catches up. Central banks like the ECB and BOE start to catch up. I don't know. What do you think of that? That was a pretty controversial forecast. I don't know what you think about it.
I would have, I personally would take the, I would probably take the other side of that forecast, but the dollar is one of the hardest variables to forecast. And I heard that from Maury Obstfeld, and he knows a lot about that sort of thing. So I think that, I would predict strengthening dollar based on Fed policy and relative growth rates. I'm sure you all, maybe one of you are going to use this. I'm sure you all saw the IMF forecast that came out this week, and they were showing decelerated global growth, but still stronger here than in other countries that are more exposed to the conflict.
Yeah, in our modeling, the other thing that matters in the intermediate term, not next month or even in a year, but over the next several years, is the trade deficit, which has gapped out quite a bit because the U.S. economy has been so much stronger than the rest of the world. So, we have been importing a lot of product and exports have been soft. So that also starts to weigh on the dollar.
I think I was the first one who got that. I just want to kind of record that.
You're right. It's true. Yeah. I don't know if that's cowbell material.
No,
cowbell, you get a cowbell if it's
I think so. Come on.
Is it cowbell?
Yeah.
Material? Okay.
Oh, I got to get it. I moved the location of them. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Go get that cowbell. All right. Jared, you're up. What's your statistic?
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I brought two because this sounded fun to me. One is, I think, pretty easy, and the other, I think, is pretty hard, and I'll give you a lot of great hints on it, and I'll bet you get it. The first one is 1%. And it came...
The insured unemployment rate.
Exactly.
Wow. Now that is a cowbell. Jared, that's the cowbell. That is the cowbell.
That's exactly right. And it's the lowest insured unemployment rate since 1970. And just for listeners to understand, how are we talking about an unemployment rate that isn't 3.6%, which is the one you have in your head from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the big jobs day? This is a rate that comes out every Thursday when the Bureau releases the unemployment insurance claims data. And it's the it's continuing claims over covered employment. So it's kind of a different statistic, but it moves very much with the overall unemployment rate. And I just brought it over because I thought it was a very topical given how tight the job market is.
That's a
good
one.
And in that regard, Chris, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I just said that's a good one.
That is a good one. Yeah. Can I ask you, this is a question I wanted to ask you because I'm confused. Where do you think we are relative to full employment? Are we now you look at that 1% insured unemployment rate, you say that's got to be full employment, but are we at full employment, or how do you think about that?
The way I think about that right now is in a very dynamic sense, which is to say that I don't think you can evaluate whether we're at full employment without thinking about the labor force and labor supply. Remember, as we all know, payroll employment is still down 1.6 million from its pre-pandemic peak, much less its pre-pandemic trend. So you would look at that and think there's room to grow. At the same time, the labor demand indicator that all the cool kids are looking at these days, which is payroll employment plus openings, right? That's the demand side, payroll employment plus openings. So payroll employment is, 160 million or whatever it is, and openings are another 11 million on top of that. Relative to the labor force, that gap there would suggest, a very hot labor market, and some people would call that full employment. I wouldn't, because I think that the that ignores one of the most important, and in my view, one of the more hopeful trends in the current economy, which is the improvement in labor supply. There is a identifiable trend. It's not a 1-month thing. And in fact, too few people recognize the fact that labor force growth is actually stronger in this recovery than in any of the past 5 recoveries up to this point. Now, it was coming from a lower trough, of course, so there's a bounce back in there. But especially if you look at prime age workers, their labor force participation rate is only 50 basis points below its prior peak. And so I wouldn't call us at full employment unless I'm willing to assume that LFPR is stuck, that participation is stuck. And I don't think it is. It's moving. It's on the move. A broader point, and then I'll stop, is that I do think that economists have a lot of thinking to do right now, more broadly about what the capacity variables are right now. What level is U star, which is GDP full capacity, U star, which is the full unemployment rate, R star, the neutral interest rate. All of those, I think, are perhaps undergoing structural shifts, and they're hard to target in the best of times. I think they're particularly hard now.
Yeah, my sense is that there's still room to go here because we're creating 500,000 plus jobs per month. You know, if we were at full employment, there's like zero probability we could be generating over 500,000 jobs each and every month. That's just not consistent.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. Yeah.
And the other thing is, you know, I know you mentioned the cool kids statistic with the unfilled jobs. You know, as an employer who posts jobs, once you post a job, pretty unusual if you would take down the posting, it's going to stay there. So I'm not sure.
That's an interesting
what
point.
We're actually measuring there. You know, because you know the economy reopened back a year ago, and everyone posted a job at the same time because we were reopening, and I don't know.
That's a really good point.
People take that down. Yeah,
I'm going to have to noodle over that. It's a really good point.
You said you had a second statistic.
I do have a second statistic, and it's 17. And I'm going to give you a bunch of hints to help you get it. Now, you might think this is very obscure. The reason I think it's okay to bring to the table is because the President of the United States talked about it last week.
Whoa.
On Friday, which is a hint. 17.
Did it come out on Friday?
It did.
Was this the Empire State Manufacturing Survey?
No.
Well, I know the Philly Fed was at 17.6, but that was this week.
No, this is just a good old 17, an integer.
An integer, 17 on the nose. And
I can give you more hints.
Okay.
This number wasn't in the report, but if you count up the number of, well, that's if I'm going to give it away if I start to say that. The CEA tweeted about this. So this is not that obscure. We tweeted about this number. Okay, I'm going to give you a big hint just to move the thing along here.
Right.
On Friday, the Bureau released the state and local unemployment report.
Oh, this is a good one.
17 states have unemployment below 4%?
17 states have the lowest unemployment on record going back to 1976.
Wow.
Wow.
That is cool. That is interesting.
Badass statistic, am I right?
Yeah,
that's a good one.
We should know that. We should be tracking that.
Yeah.
That's a really cool one. Yeah.
President mentioned it in a statement. We tweeted on it.
Where the 17 states, are they the Mountain West and South where growth has been strong, or
a lot of them? I remember Utah, Nebraska was in there, Alabama, Georgia, I think. But if you just go to the CEA Twitter thread, you'll see all the. We list them all out.
That is actually that's a cool one. That's a really good one. Yeah. In fact, we should create that measure and track that over time. That would be really good to look at. Yeah. All right, Chris, you're up.
Oh, Ryan.
Oh, Ryan. Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Ryan, you're up.
All right. Minus 68%.
Oh, geez. Is it?
It may sound bad, but I'll weave it back into Jared's point that the consumer is in good shape. So there's your hint. It's sort of consumer related.
Is that the decline in debt payments over the last? No, is that on the right track? No. Okay.
No.
Give us a hint.
Came out this week.
Yeah.
It came out this week. It's year over year, and it's a weekly number.
It's not from UI claims, is it?
It is not from UI claims.
Is it a housing related one?
It is housing related.
Oh, okay. Is that the decline in
some-
inventories over the past year? No,
It
that would
is.
be too big.
Nope. That'd be enormous.
That'd be too much.
Inventories are actually set to start to resume rising this summer.
NBA series.
Oh, is it the
NBA?
NBA? Mortgage Bankers
REFIs.
Association.
REFIs.
Oh, refis?
Oh,
Over the
refis,
past year, they're
yeah.
down 68%.
Oh, down. Oh, so first of all, you should say negative 68%.
Did I say down?
He did. No,
Oh, he did
Okay.
say down. Sorry. I
I'll
didn't
say
do that.
negative. All right.
But
No,
we
no,
are
that's
a
good.
little dyslexic on this podcast.
We do have a bad
you know,
track
so
record
when
on,
it comes to negative.
getting positive,
okay.
negatives.
That's really interesting.
Explain it,
So-
Ryan. For the
Oh, it's just a reflection of the rise of both the 15-year fixed mortgage rate and the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. So both of them have, important implications for refis. So, I think Chris and I were on a call and he mentioned that, he saw a stat that 90% of mortgages outstanding have a rate less than 5%. So we're kind of, mortgage rates are above that. So now the incentive to refi is low, but the impact on spending is going to be really small because cash out refinancing has been pretty low over the last several years. So it's not a big source of spending
I actually know this. Guess how? Here's a good statistic or question. How much cash did households take out of their homes vis-a-vis cash out refi in calendar year 2021? Roughly speaking.
I know in the first quarter of this year it was 50 billion.
Okay, well that gets you pretty
So-
close. $275 billion
Yeah,
last year. Yeah, in cash out refi. That's a good one. And you're saying it, but you still can get cash out refi at high rates because there's all this equity, homeowners equity that people want to pull out, and they might be cost effective given interest rates rising and rates on credit cards and other debt vehicles. Yeah.
Get $2.6 trillion in excess savings. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's not the first place people go to pull
that's
cash
a good
out.
point. Unless
I have a
you're
question
low
about this. Our friend Jim Parrott was talking to me about this phenomenon. Jim's a friend of mine.
He's been on the podcast.
A great housing expert. And he was talking about a bunch of businesses, these shops that sort of exist to do refis. And when we're thinking about the impacts of how sharply the mortgage rate has been climbing, I would imagine this has implications for that side of the housing finance business. Is that?
They're
would you
laying
guys-
off
For
like
sure.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's one place where there are layoffs. Yeah. Of that 100, how many UI claims last month?
184,000 last week.
Yeah, I think a fair share probably would be in that industry.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a good one. I've got one for you. I don't know if this is easy or hard. I'm not sure. So I'll just throw it out. $1,700. $1,700.
I saw this.
Yeah, I bet you did. Yeah.
Is this a tax related?
Not tax related. Nope.
Inflation.
That would have been
related.
good though, because the tax season's wrapping
Tax
up.
season,
so.
yeah. The tax refunds. But that's not this.
It's like an average income for some household.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Give us a hint.
It's housing related.
Oh.
Housing related. It's not a statistic that we get from a release. It's
A Redfin, right? Increase in the payments on the asking.
Well, you're kind of in
prices.
the ballpark.
Yeah.
You're kind of in the ballpark. Okay. It's probably too hard. It turns out it's too hard. I'll just lay it out there. That's the monthly payment on a home, median priced home with a 20% down payment at a 5.11 interest rate, which is where Freddie Mac says the 30-year fixed rate was last week. So
I see.
say in the median price home, it's hard for me to get my mind around. It's now $390,000. So half of homes that transact are above that price, half below. So if you buy the median priced home, $390,000, put 20% down. Of course, many people might not do that, but let's just go with it to make it easy. And you attach a 5.11% interest rate. It's $1,700. Now, here's another question. What was the monthly payment on the same median priced home at the prevailing interest rate a year ago? 1 year ago.
1,200. Just throwing that out.
Actually,
Throwing
a little
that out.
less than 1,200. That's a $500 per month increase in the monthly payment. That gives you a sense of, this is going to do some damage, in terms of housing activity. We're going to see some real slowing in sales.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. The housing market was pretty unhealthy. So actually some cooling in the housing market would be a good sign.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, home sales though haven't been inordinately high because of supply constraints, but yeah,
Mhm.
house price growth. Yeah, and so we'll see
Yeah,
some
let's cool it
significant
down.
moderation in house price growth, which is, I think that's a good segue to the next part of the conversation around inflation, Jared. And I think, obviously this is top of mind for most Americans. I think it probably goes back to why consumers are pretty down on things because they're obviously paying a lot more at the gas pump and when they go shopping. There's a lot to talk about here, but I guess my first question, because I do want to talk about the outlook for inflation, but my first question to get there is why? What's going on here? Why is inflation as high as it is? And I know there's probably a lot of reasons, but how do you think about this? Why 8.5% CPI inflation as of March of this year?
Well, I think the explanation is most simply framed as the intersection, or if you want to call it the collision between very strong demand and constrained supply. I think the first order explanation has to include both of those. I know there are those who want to focus just on the demand side and those who want to focus just on the supply side. I think you have to focus on both. And I think one of the ways in which you can understand why that calculation or why that framing, that simple equation is germane is to think about where we see elevated inflation, and the answer is pretty much in every advanced economy. I saw that the inflation rate March over March for the EU recently posted at 7.5%, historical record. Of course, Putin's unprovoked war is in that mix. They're more exposed to some of the commodity issues, particularly energy. But I think if you start looking around the world and look at the comparisons between countries, you'll see that every country is experiencing highly elevated inflation, advanced economy. I mean, even Japan has ticked up recently, but that's in the 1 and 2 range. And so you have to ask yourself, what did all of these countries experience? Well, yes, they all had some fiscal and monetary policy, but that was different everywhere. They all experienced the pandemic. And this is a chapter in the economic report of the president. The pandemic is absolutely fundamental in understanding the current inflation.
So there's been a lot of criticism. This goes back to the American Rescue Plan, the seminal legislation passed March of last year, close to $2 trillion in government support to help the economy navigate through the pandemic. And there's been a lot of criticism of that. Clearly that American Rescue Plan, and we've done a lot of work in this area, has been key to getting the economy where it is today in terms of jobs, in terms of low unemployment, and making sure that Americans were able to financially navigate through without losing their jobs. But there's the criticism here is that this has juiced up demand, and that this is key to what's going on, why inflation is as high as it is. So I'm just curious how you think about that criticism.
Well, again, I think here we have to be very even-handed and understand that two things. One, of course, there's been criticism, and we were getting into this earlier, all the focus on inflation. There's also been a lot of praise. And in fact, if you look at some of the publications coming out of this shop called Moody's.com, you'll see some very fulsome analysis of how important the rescue plan was. And you're not alone. Lots of others have found that as well. I think and the second point is that, we talk about demand. What does that word mean? I mean, to the average person, if I went home and talked to my wife about demand, she'd be like, well, what are you talking about? Let's be very clear here. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about an unemployment rate that is back to where it was pre-pandemic, pulling forward a recovery by years relative to what forecasters thought would be the case. We had lower child poverty in 2021 than we did in 2020. and lower in 2020 than I believe in 2019. We somehow managed to have lower child poverty. It wasn't magic. It was because of the rescue plan in 21, that is, and the impact it had on family incomes. We're coming out of this downturn with fewer evictions than anyone expected, with stronger balance sheets than anyone expected, with very little scarring in terms of lasting economic damages on individuals and households. That's what that word demand means. So yes, we got more heat on the price side, but we got more growth and a lot more very meaningful benefits for the well-being of American households.
So here we are, 8.5% CPI inflation year over year through March. Obviously, just out of bounds and incredibly painful. Ryan's actually done a lot of good work calculating the increase in monthly costs for the typical American household. I think we're up to what, $350 more a month, Ryan, something like that, to cover the higher inflation. So, and when I think about what can be done to address this, I kind of think of three buckets, and maybe we can just take one at a time. The first is around energy prices. Obviously, the Russian invasion and the spike in oil and gasoline, diesel prices is front and center. So, and I know you've been doing a lot of things in this area, and we should talk about it. The second is global supply chains, and this goes back to the pandemic and the disruptions to particularly Asia, China, where a lot of the chains begin, and that's been highly disruptive. One of the reasons why vehicle prices and furniture prices and consumer electronic prices have gone skyward. And the third bucket is, I would say, housing. And I want to talk about this because rent growth is extraordinary. I mean, double digit, and this is a problem for every American because you got to live somewhere. And what are we going to do about this? So I'll leave it up to you. Where do you want to start? I mean, I know you're working on all these things, and
we're working on all those things, and I could take the rest of our time and take you through our agenda, and I don't want to do that only because I want to hear what the group has to say. I would say that I've never been part of an administration, and as I said earlier, I've been in this political economy world for many decades. I've never been part of an administration that is doing more to try to help on the economy supply side as this one. I mentioned my Keynesian bona fides earlier in the conversation. If you've looked at my work up to now, it focuses largely on this idea that what came to be called secular stagnation, the idea that demand in the macroeconomy, particularly here, has been persistently too weak, and that this has had disproportionate effects on vulnerable households, on communities of color, and that we have to do things to strengthen demand. I didn't think as much about the supply side because we didn't have these kinds of problems. But here, we spend every working day at the behest of President Biden trying to think of what we can do to help on the supply side. On energy prices, of course, we've presided over some of the largest releases from the strategic petroleum reserves. That feeds quite directly into oil prices and gas prices. We've seen some of that. There's a much broader agenda over the longer term, including a path to renewable energy and much more climate-friendly production. On the global supply chains, we've done more than I ever could have imagined. And we have a supply side task force run by a really dedicated group of people here, helping the ports move to a 24/7 schedule. Mark, you and I have talked about economics for decades. I don't think we ever talked about dwell time.
Yeah.
Containers and port. We never use those two words. Every day I'm looking at dwell times, and dwell times are down by 50%. We're that, by the way, I should say, dwell times are the amount, not like everybody knows what they are, the length of time that a container spends in a port. So that's a snarl in the global supply chain. We're helping to improve trucking. We're having real success there in terms of increasing people's working through backlogs there. It's CDL policies. On housing, I think the best thing to do would be to look at our most recent budget, which is on the website of the omb.gov. We have deep programs, and Mark, I know you know all about these. I think you helped us think through some of them. Policies to increase affordable housing supply, which is so essential, increasing the housing choice voucher program, first generation home buyer support. One of the really interesting ideas is some ideas to help push back on exclusionary zoning. And here I just want to end on one point because people don't know enough about this.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually doing something now, historical, in the field. This is happening to help diminish exclusionary zoning. It's through the bipartisan infrastructure law of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that if you want the federal government to support a project in your town or city from the infrastructure law, which is legislated, it's moving out into the field, it's almost $1 trillion of infrastructure investment over 10 years, and you can show how that project helps push back on exclusionary zoning, how that project helps increase housing and density around areas of transportation hubs, for example, that is an added advantage to you in your bid to get that help. And it's working. We have examples of how that's being taken up by various cities. And so I thought that's a very creative idea, and we could talk much longer about all of those ideas. But we're tackling all that stuff as best we can.
You make a good point. I mean, generally, policies focused on the demand side, because that's what you can influence quickly in the near term, and it's clear that's where the Fed's is entirely focused. But actually trying to influence the supply side of the economy, which obviously would taken all the damage here from the pandemic. It's a supply side shock. The Russian invasion, that's a supply side shock. So you have to work on trying to improve what's going on the supply side of the economy. That's not easy. That's just not generally where economists and policymakers have put their thought. But obviously, it makes it a lot more difficult. Just a couple things on all the policies you mentioned. Back on energy. Just curious how you would respond to the criticism around the restrictions on pipelines and permitting. I hear this a lot from clients that the administration has been very down on fossil fuels, focused on climate. What's the trade-offs there, and how do you think about that?
I think that we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to help people get through this period of elevated oil prices, and we can't say to them, "Hey, everybody, hold tight. We're making a transition." I'm doing air quotes, which you can't see on the radio, on the podcast. Transition is economies for somebody's about to get whacked, and so we're very mindful of helping households get through this period of elevated energy prices as best we can, while plotting a course towards robust, renewable production. And that means American market share for battery production, for solar power, for wind, make it here, buy it here, build it here. These are all parts of the Biden agenda. But you can't get there unless you take the people with you. In terms of the friendliness, there are thousands upon thousands of open permits that companies already have. The president increased some just the other day, last Friday. So I that criticism doesn't really land with me. I think if you ask yourself if these companies are making some real money right now, the answer is, of course, they are. I think probably a more important question, one which big minds like the folks here on your side should take up, is, are we seeing the kind of elasticity of response in terms of supply production, in terms of rigs in the field, to these elevated prices? By some measures, at least initially, we weren't. Maybe more lately, we've seen a little bit more of that. But I think that's an important question in this space.
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed, I was just looking at the rig counts, which is obviously a good proxy for production of oil and gas in the U.S. in the fracking fields. And if you look at the year-over-year growth in the number of rigs, it's just incredibly steady. Since oil prices got above $70 a barrel, headed north, because 70 is kind of, by my calculation, break even, for the typical, rig out there operating. But ever since we got above 70, it's been, incredibly stable year-over-year growth. It's almost like this is the physical limit on what the industry can actually do in terms of increasing production. And to get it to go above that, is just not possible given the physical constraints that they operate under. So it's still, the rig counts are still a bit below where they were pre-pandemic, but they're getting back pretty fast. So this argument that there's these constraints on the ability of these companies to increase production just doesn't square with the data, at least not from what I can tell. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Hey, back on housing, you didn't mention, or maybe you did and I missed it, all the various tax credits that are available, like LIHTC, low income housing tax credit. There's been new market tax credits. I mean, I bring that up because I think that could have more of an impact sooner in terms of lifting supply. And, it also might get some bipartisan support because, obviously, it's on the tax side and Republicans might be more interested in that. It's an
important point. Again, I think that there are those probably, was it Chris or Ryan who come from a housing background, Chris could get very excited when we start talking about this, and others whose eyes glaze over. So I wanted to be respectful to the latter group. But yes, I mean, again, we have a very nice fact sheet at omb.gov from our most recent budget, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. The budget proposes $50 billion in mandatory funding, and additional low-income housing tax credits, this LIHTC, to help increase housing supply, to help stabilize housing prices over the longer term. There's money in there for funding state and local housing finance agencies that provide grants and other financing tools to agencies. Mark, there's something that you talked about, which is helping to finance community development financial institutions, which fund new construction and rehabilitation. There's a rural component, $2 billion for rural housing loan and grant program. And all of this alphabet soup is designed to do one thing. It's to make penciling out building low and moderate income housing feasible. Because I think the market failure here is, in the absence of these supports, builders are, especially right now, have all the incentives they need to build rich people's houses, but not to build middle and lower income people's houses, to which, by the way, I include manufactured housing and accessory development units. All of those are important. Chris, does this resonate with you from your background?
I would say the exclusionary zoning resonates the most. I think that is actually the greatest barrier. I talk to a lot of builders. I don't think they're averse to building affordable housing. They could make it work, except in the current environment, right? Given the supply chain issues, they're facing the higher costs. But it's really, what they tell me is that it's the zoning that really dissuades them, right? It's just not possible to build in certain areas where there's clearly the demand, but the laws don't, or the regulations don't permit it.
Yeah, and
I'm excited most about that proposal.
Yeah, no, that's a great proposal. And so there's two things. There's the proposal to undertake doing what we can to get rid of exclusionary zoning. But people always say, "Oh, the federal government can't do anything about exclusionary zoning." That's a local thing. And I think we've proved that we can come up with innovative policies that could help there. And just once more, let me say, there is a policy in the field that is actively doing this. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, jurisdictions get rewarded when they apply for funds where their land use policies promote density, which is a key to boosting supply and often pushes back on exclusionary zoning. So that's a policy that's in the field. You got to think creatively about how we can leverage federal resources to crack that nut.
Oh, you're right. This is a first. It's always been, it's a local NIMBY issue, right? That's
yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time. I know the taxpayer is calling. I just want to end with a kind of more open-ended final question. Maybe give us a little bit of guidance as economists. What should we be thinking about that we're not thinking about? I mean, I know that's a little blue sky, but is there some area of thought, research that would be helpful to you,
absolutely,
policymaker?
Absolutely. First of all, keep doing what you're doing. Your work is tremendously helpful to us, and I don't say that because it's always patting us on the back. It's helpful to us when it's patting us on the back and whacking us on the head. I think let me tick off a few things that I know I walk around thinking about. All of them have to do with risk, with the probability of things going badly. I think that digital currencies embed significant risks. There are potential innovations that we shouldn't ignore, but I think the risks of crypto in particular are something that we've tried to think about here. The president had an executive order. The Treasury put out a report on this that I thought elevated these risks. One thing that appears to be happening in this space is that many disproportionate numbers of people of color have been investing in some of these digital assets. And I think making sure people understand those risks is super important, both at the individual level, but also at the systemic level. I'm a very big devotee of the Minsky theory of cyclical innovations biting you in the rear end if you ignore them as cycles evolve. I think that we're in a situation where we have the conflict and the war in Ukraine, creating risk in terms of commodity prices. We're still dealing with a 100-year pandemic, and I think that this should give us, economists should think about two things in this context. One, what are the best policies to have in place to ensure both individual, community, and macroeconomic well-being in the face of elevated risks, tail probabilities that you may not, climate's another one, tail probabilities that, may look like, they're not, you're going to fall on your head tomorrow, but are very real, have to be taken very seriously. What policy agenda should we have in place to provide the insurance against those risks, both for people and for the macroeconomy? And then secondly, part of that, do not, economists, hear my voice, do not assume perfect implementation of everything. Too often we're like, we have an unemployment insurance system, assume it works perfectly. What we need are our greatest minds thinking about ways to ensure that the implementation of our risk management policies that I'm advocating can be effectively implemented. Some of that means fixing your roof when the sun shines, by the way, and not waiting to a recession to question the software in the UI system. But please, brothers and sisters in our field, don't assume seamless implementation.
Those are great ones. And we're certainly thinking about both the digital currency and kind of like risk management, and thinking about what kinds of things we should be implementing, warts and all, to try to make sure that if we get into those tail scenarios that we have some policies that can help out and help us navigate through. But let me end it here, and thank you, Jared, for a wonderful conversation, but more importantly for the service that you've provided to our country over the years. Obviously you're very thoughtful, and I know you've sacrificed a lot to be able to provide this help to all of us, and so thank you for that. And it was good to have you on, my friend. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. I hope I see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Well, that was a great conversation with Jared. A lot to think about there, but maybe we'll just spend a few minutes and try to recap. Maybe the way to do that is I'll just an open-ended question. What do you think? Was there anything he said that resonated with you especially, or you would push back on? Anything that you'd like to point out? Chris, anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, he made a lot of great points, and it was great to get his insights into what the administration is thinking.
I loved his joke. That joke.
The joke was good.
That joke was fabulous. Yeah.
That'll go down in the annals of inside economics for sure. So
I'll definitely use that. That was really wonderful. Yeah.
So now we're gonna debate. Do we want cowbells to ask Carl for funding to get inside economic cowbells, or T-shirts that say red shirt or brown pants?
Yes. Well, I would say both.
Yeah.
Come on, Carl. What's the deal? But what do you think, Chris? Any pushback? Anything in particular?
One thing that stood out just at the end there was as he was
Yeah.
going through some of the issues, I would certainly agree with him. And I'll paraphrase here. I'm a big advocate of government infrastructure and actually investing in government infrastructure as something we need to do for the next crisis, right? There was the unemployment insurance benefits that we were able to get out this time, but that system is quite clunky. We could refine that further. There are lots of things that we should really be investing in terms of how we can optimize the government strategies so that when we do get into trouble, we have the tools, the data, the systems in place to respond. So I would certainly put a plug for that investment. I don't think it's that large. Right? I think the dividends would pay off substantially next time around.
Yeah, very good. And Ryan, anything in particular stand out for you?
No, I just second what Chris said. I think the pandemic showed that our UI system is broken. But I think early on in our conversation, he was talking about a recession and that household balance sheets are in really good shape. I do think that doesn't get enough attention. You brought up corporate balance sheets.
Well, you're not paying attention. You say 75% probability of recession. What?
I'm paying attention to it, but here's the point: is that usually recessions are caused by some glaring imbalance in the economy, but this is an unusual cycle. This is going to be more boom bust, and we didn't get into it, but I mean, financial markets are already talking about a 94% probability of a 75 basis point rate hike in June. I mean,
I missed that. Really?
Yeah, it just popped up on the terminal. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, the Fed is going to get back to neutral as fast as they can, and I just think that we're going to be vulnerable to something else, anything else that goes wrong. So it doesn't have to be an imbalance with consumers or households. It could just be your garden variety boom bust type cycle.
Are we putting too much emphasis on probability of recession and not enough on severity?
Severity. I think that's.
I don't think what I'm hearing universally. Nobody thinks that the next recession actually would be quite severe because of all the economic fundamentals and the strengths. So
I got that question this week from a reporter asking me about what's the probability of recession and what would it be as severe as the pandemic, or would it be closer to the Great Recession or 2001? So, yeah, I agree with you. It will be a mild recession.
Well, the thing is, economists are loath to call recession. They're even loather to call a severe recession. I mean, I can even go back to the financial crisis when it first happened. It started in January of 2008, and it looked like that was going to be, this is going to be a mild recession. and what happens is it starts feeding on itself, right, and exposing things that you don't even know are a problem, or at least certainly not to the degree that they are. So
my point is we should be rooting out those things. What are the fissures? What are the cracks in the foundation here?
Yeah.
And so far, right, at least as we've discussed, there really aren't glaring ones.
Yeah, it's hard to find them, right?
You can find pockets in households, right? So certainly lower income households or zombie corporations that are out, out there that have been surviving because of the low interest rate environment. So clearly there's going to be some pain in the next recession, but
well, that's a problem. Like go back again to the financial crisis. Do you remember the then Fed Chair Ben Bernanke giving a speech on subprime mortgage, right? So we had all said, okay, if there is a kind of a soft spot in the system that might get exposed and create a bigger problem, it would be all this mortgage lending, because obviously the housing market was, gangbusters and prices were rising and a lot of building and everything else.
Yeah, be contained, right?
And he came out with this speech saying subprime mortgage, no big deal. I'm paraphrasing obviously, but that was clearly the message. So, again, back to my point, we're pretty reluctant to call out, but I will say this just does not feel, the fundamentals of this economy feel pretty good to me. I mean, very different than the fundamentals that prevailed prior to the financial crisis. So I agree with you on severity. You would think it would be relatively mild, but
don't you think we do a pretty good job? I mean, we keep track of the probability of recession, but we have that risk matrix, the global and U.S. risk matrix, and that kind of because it's the catalyst that determines the severity and the length of the recession, and we kind of identify what potential catalysts are. I mean, we could be wrong; we could miss a couple, but I think we have a pretty.
That's a good tool. I really
identify
like that tool. All these potential risks. What's the probability of that risk, and then also what's the severity, the economic loss, the present value of the economic loss if that risk actually were to occur. It is interesting, you have one, I have one, I don't know if Chris has one, they're similar, but they're not the same, which is
No.
actually quite interesting. Very
We'll
interesting.
have to get together and
Yeah. You know
debate.
where I would push back, and I remember I said, Jared is one of these guys that there's other than Alan Blinder, he's the only guy I mostly agree with on everything. And by the way, the one thing that he was alluding to, he and Blinder not agreeing on trade. That's the one area I agree with Blinder on trade. I disagree with Jared. At least I don't know where he stands now, but historically he's been much more skeptical of trade. And in the context of China, maybe that makes more sense. But I always before China, thought and even with China, I thought Trans-Pacific Partnership was a better way to go than trade war and hire terrorists. But anyway, I say that with this comment, and that is, I would push back on his explication for why inflation is so high. Of course, it's demand and supply. He seemed to be suggesting it. Demand is almost or not in the same. It's in the same ballpark as supply as driving the higher inflation. I just don't see it that way. I think what we're observing, the pickup of inflation a year ago when the economy reopened and we had the American Rescue Plan, that was demand-driven inflation mostly. But what we're observing now, that is almost entirely supply side. I don't see that as demand. In fact, consumer demand has been, pretty pedestrian, over the last almost, certainly in terms of goods, it's been flat for a year, and for overall consumer spending, it's been pretty pedestrian. Here's a statistic for you. I just calculated this. The growth in consumer spending since the pandemic hit over the past 2 years through March is average annual real consumer spending is 2.3%. Excuse me, 2.3%. You know what it was in the 2 years prior to the pandemic through March of 2020? 2.4%.
Yeah.
No different. So consumer spending demand is just demand. It's really the supply side of this economy that's been all messed up. But it's interesting that he seems to be saying demand's more of an issue here than supply is an issue, but demand is more of an issue than I would say. So if I had to push back on him, that's where I would push back in terms of his his assessment of where the economy is. Anyway, a lot to think about there. A really good conversation. I'm going to advertise my Twitter handle again at Mark Zandi. Just saying, you can follow me on Twitter.
You haven't been very active recently.
I have been active. Yeah.
No, you haven't. Or maybe
have
I just
not
don't know
been
how to
active?
use
What
a
are you talking
Twitter
about?
account. Because when I was on vacation, I was like, oh, let's see what Mark's saying.
Really?
Crickets.
I thought
Crickets.
geez, I don't want to go down the Twitter rabbit hole. Like, that'd be, it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, but
No, yeah, you got to stay
I
out of
thought
that.
it was pretty active. Geez, that's, yeah.
Or maybe just a few days out checking.
Yeah. And you, what's your Twitter handle?
At realtime_econ.
There you go. And Chris is not really active on Twitter. He's a big, as we pointed out in the past, LinkedIn maven. So
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to call it a podcast. We didn't get to listeners' questions. We got to do that. Got to remind me to get back to listeners' questions because they're piling up. I have a bunch of good ones, but we'll do that next week because we're running out of time. So with that, thank you for your attention, and we'll call it a podcast. See you next week.